Hey, Jared.
Hey, Glenn.
Hello.
How you doing today?
I'm trying to turn the radio off here. I just turned it on for the news. Okay.
You listen to the radio?
Well, I just try to get the news because they announced this morning that the Globe and Mail newspaper had broken a story that in the spring this year, the Prime Minister ordered that all files dealing with refugees be taken out of Citizenship and Immigration and delivered to the Prime Minister's office for vetting. So what was that all about? It was at about the same time as Jennifer had written the Prime Minister a letter stating that Vic Taves, the Minister of Public Safety, had raped her. So I don't know if that's connected, or is it connected to something else, like the Syrian numbers of refugees that Canada is now choosing to allow into the country.
Now, why would they allow the Syrian refugees? What would be their motive for that, their agenda?
Well, it's a request by the United Nations that all countries in the world take in a number of refugees from Syria. Now, Syria is the main laboratory for genetically engineering sleeper cells.
So they would be taking in sleeper cells from
Yeah,
Syria.
the U.S. has apparently agreed to take in 185,000. And Canada, at last count, we're talking about something between 10 and 40,000. None of them can be vetted for security reasons because there's nobody to ask questions of. At the other end, there's no government basically operating in Syria, so they certainly can't give a clearance, whereas Jennifer, being a director of nursing, automatically had to have a FBI clearance. And while she was in charge, the rating of the institute went up to 5-star, the highest rating given in the U.S., and when she left, it dropped to 4. So what is the problem with allowing Jennifer into Canada except for the purpose of disguising this project they have of sleeper cells man the borders?
Yeah, another reason I was thinking, why they won't let her in now is because she could testify in court.
Absolutely.
With Tom.
And they don't want her testifying in court, and she's asked that there be a change of venue because a court by the Seaway is not exactly a sure thing. You're dealing with people who deal with CBSA, the border security, every day. And so she asked to have it moved to Ottawa. They turned her down. Right now, what's pending is her next appearance in court will be on Thursday of next week. And on Thursday of next week, she has to tell the court whether or not she has a lawyer. And we'll know tomorrow whether or not this former ombudsman of Ontario is going to be on board.
When did you ask for his services? Like a week ago or more?
Yeah, she had gone in on Tuesday, and they said, we'll give you till 2 weeks, till the Thursday, to find a lawyer.
Yeah, I remember you saying the cell found him.
Yeah, the cell spoke with one person who's waiting for trial, which is a former senator. And Doug Finley is his name. And he said he had a contact that may lead to somebody who would take the job, because he had just been, the word fired is not quite right, because he had a term of office which was expiring, and the opposition had said to the Premier of Ontario that they were in agreement that his mandate should be renewed, and she said, no way. I'm not having him here any longer. So in actual fact, he no longer had a job, and apparently there's an assistant in there, Barbara Finley, and I don't know if she's related to Doug Finley or not, but she basically would have been his contact in trying to get the guy, Andre Marin is his name, and he just finished an investigation of Ontario Hydro, and being let go by the Premier is an insult. He's now without employment. However, in a few days, 10 days or so, there's going to be an election in Canada, and he may be hired by whoever wins the election to be an ombudsman at the federal level. So it's kind of a little bad timing for Jennifer, a little too soon, because it would be clearer after the election. But we're hoping that he'll give a positive response. Of course, a lawyer would immediately go to federal court with a writ of habeas corpus, which basically means give me the prisoner, or give me the body, give me the person, so I can prepare for trial. And that means she would be released from jail. She's been there, 50 days or so now.
So, like, every day when they say, whenever they release her, she just walks back across the border?
Yeah. Well, when the court releases her, the CBSA grab her, put her in the car and drive her across the border. And then the U.S. says, you can't do that. There's no court order. And you don't leave a person on a road far from anywhere, because their border guard building must be about 5-10 miles outside of any place. And so she's been returned 4 times. And I think that in 3 occasions, the U.S. border guard drove her to the place that's the border, and she got out and walked back to the station in Canada. And one time she had to walk all the way from the U.S. border station, 7 o'clock in the morning, cold morning, no sweater, no nothing. She was freezing. And when she got back in, she was told she could stay on the bench in the office, and she said, "No, I need to lie down." So they took her into a cell, and she got a blanket there, and then they took her out of that station, which is at Lansdowne, and drove her all the way to Cornwall, which would be probably 60 miles, to an RCMP detachment office that had some kind of communications network so that a justice of the peace could do the initial interview on video. And then they brought her to the detention center in Ottawa. And, of course, she's learning a lot of details about how that prison system works. And according to all of the prisoners who are regulars, Ottawa's detention center is the worst in the entire province. And they said any place else is worth pleading guilty for, just to get out of that Ottawa place. But she's
I know it's
been
like
there.
being in jails like that. Like when I had a problem with my license, it was suspended, and I had to go to court. And over here, like soon as if you miss a court date, like the police are at your house.
There's a warrant.
Yeah, and they'll take you to jail just so you can go to court. And the court's right upstairs, and it's like the court's holding cell, and it's just uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. It's not
Yeah.
So I know what she's going through. It's pretty horrible.
The first day they took her out, it was in the morning. They grabbed her in the front, claiming that they came because I had told the Hydro that there was, or not Hydro, Bell, that there was a broken wire in front of the house. And if they didn't come and fix it, I'd call the police because the wire could get entangled in a car driving by or 4x4s coming out of the gully. And the OPP claimed that they came here because I had called them for the telephone wire, but they had no intentions of dealing with the telephone wire. They came in and grabbed Jennifer by the wrists, 2 of them, dragged her out to the driveway and put handcuffs on her in the driveway. And by that time I had made it to the front, and I saw them put her in the back seat of their car. They had 2 cars. One was a regular police car. The other one was more an investigator's car. Took her here to the detachment, and immediately CBSA, the Border Security Agency, sent 2 women officers from Brockville, picked her up, brought her to the Brockville station, then took her across the bridge and dumped her, and that's where the guards didn't know what to do with her, and they sent her to some kind of halfway house about Watertown, near Watertown. And when she got there, the warden of the place, the boss, said, "You can't bring this woman here. She has no papers. There's no eviction. There's no court order. There's nothing. You can't bring her here. Take her back." So they drove back the 20 miles, and Jennifer was let out of the car and walked across to the Canadian side, got arrested again, of course. There were three times in a row that she was arrested and walked back after they dumped her on the other side. They kept trying to find a shift on the American border guard side that would accept her. And so they tried. One was in the middle of the night. They arrived at the U.S. border at something like 12:30 in the morning. And Jennifer said she was going to walk back to the U.S. people. They allowed her to call me. I mean, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I told her, "No, stay until it's daylight. Don't walk in the dark." And at 7 o'clock in the morning, she walked back again. So it was the third time. And then there was a court appearance where, in order to have her arrested outside or being brought into Ottawa for the detention center, they had to manufacture some criminal activity or whatever. And when she got to court, the judge said all the charges except coming back into Canada have been dropped, because they didn't want any paperwork that would show that she had even been in Canada. They just wanted her out. So somebody is giving orders not to allow her into the country that is causing them to act in a ridiculous manner. The cell has described her being dumped on the other side of the border as attempted murder by proxy. In other words, if you leave a woman on a highway with no money and no clothes except what you were wearing working in the garden, it's more than likely that whoever picks her up along the highway might in fact cause her harm. And they don't seem to care. So it has to be someone with a fairly high authority who is giving the orders to make that happen. And that would have to be either a minister of public safety or a minister of citizenship and immigration or the prime minister's office.
How does that power structure work in that area? Like, I remember you yesterday saying something along the lines like the border guards, they're like their own entity. What
you have is not limited to Canada. In the 1500s, in France, in Paris, there was a guy, a priest, archbishop or something of Paris, who founded a group of border guards, if you will, or the proper word would probably be bureaucrat. The theory was that royals and religious hierarchy were genetically engineered for their task, to be dominant in society. And his suggestion is that is deemed in the long run to failure. What you need is a reversal of the process. You have to engineer the line people, the ground level, going up rather than the royals coming down, so that the information that first arrives to what is supposed to be the government is in the hands of the controlling interests. So they began genetically engineering in Latvia a group of bureaucrats that over the period of 1500 to 1700 was infiltrated into French society and was infiltrated by declaring that there were kids left at the church type of thing, or the monastery or the nunnery, and had been abandoned, and they needed families to take them, so they would pay some fee to a family who would take in a child. The same kind of thing happened in Quebec here, and when I was a kid, there were families in Quebec that had 15 to 20 children. And we could never understand that in Ottawa because most families had 2 or 3 kids. In any event, this infiltration into society of what they called foundlings was not really abandoned children, but it was the product of genetic engineering entered into an egg prior to fertilization in a laboratory. Beacon babies, if you want, done in a glass jar and that kind of stuff, and inserted into families would mean that people, when they grew up, would believe that they were just another kid from that family. However, they had been modified genetically to be professional bureaucrats. Bureaucrat, take the word. First of all, it's the girls that are doing it, so you have a B at the front. That's the girls, because a B is linked to the shape of breasts. Then you have the 2 letters U-R, and Caucasians are said to have come from Babylon in a town called U-R. But it's a phonetic working of the language in order to tell those in the know who this person is by the function that it will be directed to later on in life. U-R, and then O is E-A-U in French, which means water. So you are water rats. Rats are the original animal that lived in caves and did the primary investigation of the cave. And what a bureaucrat does is the primary investigation in the job they've been put in. So knowing that these individuals are bureaucrats by the people who did the genetic engineering, who had the only education at the time, the priests and the royals, especially the priests, because royals were kept out of this. They were in charge of government, and these people were going to affect the information that they would normally receive and redirect it to the priest rather than to the king. So they were inserted as they grew up and got social engineering from the church and education to be a bureaucrat, fitted into a slot, and that would mean that they were sleeper cells, getting paid by the government, but getting the tips from the priests and nuns who were controlling them. And the priests and nuns getting all the information that came into a government department or a business or what have you first, and deciding whether or not the king should know before anything ever happened. And they would develop an archive where the documents would be put in an archive, and somebody looking for, say, the name Kealey, whether it's done by hand or by machine, would be looking for the spelling Kealey, but they would change either the first letter or the last letter in the name so that somebody who didn't know wouldn't be able to retrieve it, because it would appear as if there was no file under that person's name. And that's exactly what they've done with us at the Department of Immigration. Now, a sleeper cell is not limited to affecting only its own life, but in fact, genetically speaking, it transfers the genetic engineering that was done in the lab to them, to their offspring. And they can pass that genetic engineering messaging structure 4 generations, which means one person coming out of the lab and having children who have children who have children are affecting about 80 to 100 years. And then it starts to lose strength, so they have to put in a new member into the family. Families get new members by adoption means. It is much easier in modern times, for these genetic engineered children to be made in other countries than those in the West. And therefore, there is always among wealthy people an urge to adopt from foreign countries, mostly Africa and Asia. And what they're getting is a genetically engineered child from a lab put into their family, which will affect people for the next 80 to 100 years. It's like the Cuomo, the governor, and Cuomo, the journalist on CNN, they had a story on about their family history. And about 80 to 100 years ago, in Italy, their great-great-grandmother was a foundling. And the end product ends up being a journalist and a governor, which in modern times is equivalent to a royal. And that's basically the structure that people who are hired at CBSA, Canadian Border Security Agency, it's not a government department, it's an agency, and have other bosses, they have to go to a place in Quebec called Rigaud. And their DNA is studied in the same way as refugees' DNA is studied. And if you are approved at Rigaud, in the vernacular of the English language used by CBSA, you have been seated at Rigaud. Seated suggests privilege. In Europe, in the old days when they built stadiums, only the privileged were seated. By the way, the word privilege has in it privy, and privy means private or secret. And a bathroom in England is known as a privy toilet. It's where you have your biggest secrets are shared in the place where usually only one person goes at a time. In the White House, there are many stories about presidents sitting on the toilet giving instructions to foreign leaders who had come to the White House Oval Office and are basically denigrated to show power in the hands of the president as opposed to them. He talks to them from the toilet. So in French, and your mother can confirm that, in French, if you say seated, a mother would say to a child in English, sit at the table. But in French, a mother would say, fais cici. Cici is phonetically two letter C's. Two breasts, if you put them together, would make like a B. If you look around the world, ISIS is a military organization at war in Iraq and Syria. ISIS is really CC, backwards.
Yeah.
Got to remember, this whole system began in the Middle East. The president of Egypt is called CC. If you look around the world, you'll see a lot of CCs. That means that what is occurring today, the war in Syria, for example, is not a war that is that just sprang up. It's part of a bigger plan. All of the people who are part of the bigger plan have some connection to the phonetic CC, whether it's in the European version or ISIS if it's read from the other direction. An S, an I and an L are pictorially the same thing as number one, pictograph version of coding. So the letter I in the capitals is like a number one. The letter L in the lowercase is like a number one. Therefore, when you hear on TV somebody say ISIS or ISIL, it's the same thing. One is using a pictographic form of coding, the other one is using a phonetic means of coding. But they speak to each other on TV like that all the time, on the news, in coding, and there are many versions of coding. So one thing we know for sure is that from the time of the 18th dynasty in Egypt, timing approximately 1500 to 1200 BC is the period in which the 18th dynasty occurred. The border guards were always foreign to the people in the country. And that's occurred all the way through when the Russians had their revolution and kicked out the royals. They also kicked out all of the border guards, who were mostly Ukrainians. Canada is no different than the 18th dynasty or Russia. It has a border guard, and I suspect the USA has some connection as well. Border guards who are genetically engineered end products, not necessarily the ones who came out of the lab. That would have been done under the story you use in the U.S. about Johnny Appleseed. Johnny Appleseed delivered apple seeds that had been genetically engineered to farmers, and along with it came a Bible. So you engineer the kid, and then you teach him from a book that is a coding manual. Most of the stuff written in the Bible was, in fact, copied from the books of Enoch, which basically were written at about the year 3400 BC, about 600 years after Adam and Eve, and therefore the Bible comes 3600, 37, 3800 years later, because it was published somewhere around 175 AD. Every time they speak of races, they're fooling the people they're talking about to the people they're talking to. because it's not races that is important. It's cloning of genetic pools. Because within a race, there are clones of each pool. And it's a hidden weapon when you can put a person into another country, another family, and into a position of control, not necessarily being prime minister or president, but control is mostly at the intake level. And therefore, the most powerful group of people in any country are the associations called Human Resources Associations. HR, just like royals, His Royal Highness in reverse, Human Resources. And the human resources are genetically engineered foundlings. In Canada, they were established in Newfoundland. Newfoundland was the last place to join Canada, and that was done in 1949. But it's not just Newfoundland, it's Newfoundland and DNA and Labrador. Laboratory, labor, lab, door. So out of the lab's door came foundlings placed in Newfoundland for distribution to other places. So the first place they put them in the 1500s, early 1600s, was in what today we call Nova Scotia. It wasn't called Nova Scotia at the time because it wasn't a New Scotland. It was French people they put there. And once they decided that this group was genetically engineered properly to operate, they were evicted out of Nova Scotia, and they made their way down the coast of the United States and the upper Northeast and all around the Gulf of Mexico into places like Louisiana, New Orleans, to give a control along the border that was in fact originating from Labrador, or their descendants within a 4-generation period were from Labrador. And then they went to Ireland, and they got a group of people from the plains between the mountains in northern Great Britain, and they called them Scotsmen. And they brought them from Scotland to Nova Scotia, which is the Latin version of New Scotland. And that's why today in the Maritimes, most of the people have origins from Ireland or Scotland or France, because some people who were kicked out always come back. So you have a number of people like that. And many of the descendants of African slaves settled in Nova Scotia after they were freed. So genetic pools, if you can imagine, it takes 200 years, like 2 batches from the lab, 100 years apart, to change an entire population. Jesuits from Portugal went into Japan in the 1600s. It was a military camp. Samurais were basically the way of leading the country. It was a military operation. They wanted it changed to a leadership by an emperor. So for 200 years, no one was allowed to enter Japan or leave Japan without the permission of the Portuguese Jesuits who had gone there to genetically engineer the population. And at the end of 200 years in the 1800s, you get the story of the last samurai. And the government has changed to one which is led by an emperor who later on gets into a war in 1940s, gets into a war with America, and again a change is made from having an emperor to having a cosmetic emperor, just like European countries have democracies and they switch away from the king to more a bureaucratic country. The rats hand over power to the bats. The bats in a cave are the ones who get across obstacles. Either a lake or a river or something, you need to get to the other side. The bat is a rat with wings. And that's why in baseball they call a batter the guy who can hit the ball in the air and have it drop beyond the players in the front field, and you can get to first base, second base, third base, or if you get it beyond right onto the other side of the fence, you've hit a home run. But a bat and a cat together explore mostly the inside of a cave. A cat, on the other hand, is a big rat without wings, but the ability to climb trees and what have you. And it goes out of the cave to investigate the world outside. And one of the things that it discovered at one time was a crying child, having been, evolutionary speaking now, a congregation of the proper material elements in a pond of water gets hit by lightning, and a child is born in water and climbs out 9 months later. This could have happened once every 100,000 years or every million years, because we've had 3.5 billion years in which to produce, by chance, a child. And every child that was born, and there wouldn't have been many, would die because there's no nurture involved. And for human beings, you need a nurturer. Guess what? Out of the cave comes one day a mountain lion. Lost her babies at birth. Died in the cave. And she goes out looking for a baby. Usually they just steal it from another cat. come across this little human baby. Hey, sounds good. Grab it by the neck, take it into the cave, and feed it. The concept is the story of Tarzan. If you look at all the Tarzan movies, he was raised by apes, but there is a respect between him and lions. And he's never attacked by lions. Tarzan. Rat. Tar. Rat. New beginning. A genetically engineered baby done by evolution. Later on in life, people who want to copy the process are called evil. Evolution. Genetic engineers in a monastery are evil. They have evil intent. What makes it evil is everything they do is self-serving. Nothing to do with what's right for humanity, but only what will bring them reward, and power is the ultimate reward. So they have manufactured people by copying evolution and place them in positions to be raised to take either positions of power or positions at the front gate. They answer the phone. They get the emails. They open up the mail that comes to the door. In a police department, they are the receptionists. And everything that comes in is sorted out as to what their bosses should know and what their controllers should know.
It's funny you mention that, Glenn, because right now, for a little while now, it's been on the news, Florida, a clerk is like halting the process of allowing same-sex.
Yeah.
So it just shows that they can, clerks have a lot of power. They can stop.
The group that was created in the 1500s in Paris was called Congregation of Clerks. And tomorrow is their feast day in the Catholic Church, the 9th of October. You got to remember the number 9 is the number for women, and it was the number for Pluto. And what happened to Pluto? It disappeared. It was downgraded, and now it's making a comeback. But it's been away for a while. Gone in for retooling like a Volkswagen. It lied all its life about the quality of exhaust coming out of its engine by changing the software, telling the vehicle, whenever your front wheels aren't turning, it means you're being tested. So switch your exhaust settings to this instead of that, which is used for gas consumption. You want to have less gas consumption on the highway, but more gas consumption cannot be measured, and therefore the software changes the settings so that when your front wheels aren't turning, it means you're being tested. That is the life we live in, Jared. Nobody is immune to it. We all have been affected by it. Very few of us know, outside of the people who are doing it, that nuns didn't dress the way they dressed because they wanted to appear to be 2,000 years old. They dress because you can't tell a woman is pregnant when she's wearing nun's clothing. Genetically engineered, artificially inseminated, a baby is born, and guess what? They call it a foundling. They tell you somebody left it in a basket at the front door. No, they didn't. It happened whenever you were agreeing to your final vow in the nunnery. You were impregnated just like horses. Why is it that it's so difficult for people to grasp the concept that human beings are just animals? And that if you can genetically engineer a thoroughbred, what the hell would stop you from engineering a bureaucrat or a monarch or a cardinal or a mass murderer or a serial rapist or a journalist who's going to report on it? Nothing prevents them from doing it, except they don't talk about it in public, and most human beings are told, if you haven't heard it on CBS or CNN, it ain't true. Well, it is true. They've been genetically engineering since the 18th dynasty. Mummies in Egypt. The word meant what it says. Mum's the word. Keep it a secret. Mum is your mother, mummy. Gotta go.
You gotta go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Okay, bye, Glen.
Okay.